Really excited about this first panel on the theme of all things housing, appraisals. Appraisals have been blowing up deals, appraisal gaps, other appraisal issues. Reducing bias is the new gold standard for appraisals. And I'm really excited to introduce our editor-in-chief of HW Media, Sarah Wheeler, Kenon Chen, EVP of Corporate Strategy at Clear Capital, and Rachel Robinson, Director of Collateral Policy and Product Development at Rocket. Take it away, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, guys. Yeah, we're really excited about this panel. Appraisal bias has been a huge issue for consumers, for the GSEs, for companies in our space, and for appraisers. So we want to talk about that. So first, one thing we wanted to do was just define bias. People mean different things by that. You know, if you look at the dictionary definition, it's a prejudice for or against a certain group, or a person, or a thing. And we know, you know, if you marry that with what Fannie Mae defines as the role of an appraiser, which is someone who gives a professional opinion of the value of the collateral of a loan. And you think about that, even in that definition by Fannie Mae, the word opinion there shows that, you know, it demonstrates there is some subjectivity in this process. And so, but then when you think about the professional part, that's where that comes in. So, you know, you could be biased about anything for any reason. We were talking about the fact that if you had prior experience with a certain neighborhood or a kind of housing, it could be against the pet that's in the house, but it could also be against the homeowner, right? And specifically here, we're talking about racial bias. So we just want to kind of set that stage. We're excited to have you guys. So let's, the first question, Kenon, what can we do to really, what are some practical things we can do to really even see bias, to really understand what that is?
Yeah, it's interesting timing. You know, just a week ago, you know, Monday, Freddie Mac put out their analysis on appraisal data. They looked at 12 million appraisals and you know, ran a number of different you know, tests to try to understand, you know, what trends were there. And you know, the conclusion of that was that they were seeing a difference in the gap between appraised value and purchase contract value in Black neighborhoods and Latino neighborhoods as opposed to mostly white neighborhoods. And it's really the first study, I think, of its type. There's been a number, of course, academic research that's been done, a number of folks utilizing AVMs, automated valuation models to try to understand it. But this is the first one where it's really the appraisal data that's being looked at. And I think that's significant because I think one of the first things we have to do is we have to be willing to look at the data. We have to be willing to look at our own data that we have and look at it with an open mind and understand not just, you know, we're not just looking for blame or try to figure out who's being racist. That's not the point. We're trying to understand who's being impacted, right, by decisions that are being made. And as we understand the impact, I think then we can come up with good solutions as well to ensure that there's no inequities, you know, happening. So I think Freddie Mac is really leading the way now. I know that Fannie Mae is working on a study as well, as they've said, to look at the data, understand what's going on, take an objective, you know, approach to it, and then see what solutions there might be if there's issues.
Yeah, great. I'm really glad you brought that up because really what you hear when you talk about it is just, people are like, well, it's just anecdotal, or I don't see that happening, or I do see that happening. So to have actual data on 12 million loans, really helpful. Well, one of the things that you know, people say first off is like, okay, well, what is the potential for technology to really change this conversation, to really eliminate bias in the appraisal process? So, Kenon, you work for a tech company here. You have a tech company. So what would you say to that? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, you know, there's been a lot of focus over the past few years on digitizing, you know, the mortgage process, and obviously, you know, Rocket's led the way in changing the narrative around what's possible when it comes to digitization and how that can affect the you know, the borrower. And I think it's the same thing for appraisals. We have to start with digitizing the process. It's no longer okay for it to be someone walking through the home with a clipboard, you know, and making mental notes and then, bringing that back to their desk however much time later, and then trying to translate that. And then you get a small view of that report when you get the final appraisal report, right? You're getting a narrow view where you're not really seeing what the person saw at the home, which means that the homeowner or the buyer isn't also understanding what was seen, at the home, which leads to, I think, a lot of questions, And so it's time for digitization, capture the home as it is, right there in a digital format, so that we can have transparency and fidelity downstream.
Yeah, I would completely echo everything that you said there. For sure, you guys have been such a great partner in, navigating this space. But ultimately, it gets down to the transparency piece. And, we're in this space where there's so much room for error in the appraisal process. Set bias aside for a moment, so much subjectivity and so much room for one person to measure one way, somebody to measure another way. We need to all be speaking the same language, and the common ground that helps us find that language is technology. So I think we've seen this happen in multiple spaces throughout the lending process. This is probably one of those last spaces. It's really time for us to bring the tools in to help guide appraisers to making more objective decisions and just having the common ground and really protecting folks. I mean, I don't think anybody wants to be in a space where you're being accused of something maybe that doesn't even exist. And the more consistency you have from person to person, I think that brings an element of protection and thoughtfulness to the process that I think is really missing right now.
Really great point on accuracy, consistency, and transparency, right? Those are the things that are going to make a difference. Well, one of the reasons we wanted you guys to talk together is just the idea of, how can lenders and appraisal management companies, how can solution providers, what do partnerships look like, and what does the partnership bring that can help eliminate bias?
Well, the first partnership piece would be Kenon, reducing fees, maybe guaranteeing turn times. What kind of options you might have there, but
Wow, right on stage. Huh?
You're welcome.
Okay.
But in this space in particular, I think the first step, and we're starting down this path, which is really exciting, is just we've got to open the dialogue. This is different from what folks are used to. People are resistant to change, it's human nature, and we have to start talking about it. And not every idea is going to be a great idea, and I think we have to discuss what's working, what's not working, and work in collaboration and be open to how we take ourselves from where we're at to where we want to go. And you're not going to do that without, opening up the dialogue. And we've been really fortunate to have such a great partner at Clear Capital to be able to, engage in that dialogue and learn together and innovate together. And it's been a great experience.
Yeah, I think it's solving issues like this. This is a huge, complex issue with a lot of nuance, and a lot of, it's highly charged, right? Let's just be honest. But I think the more that you can have a relationship where you're talking about not just the process of things, not just the products, but you're also talking about the things that, that are bigger than any one company, bigger than any one solution company to solve, and the things that you just know are the right things for the industry, and being willing to partner together, and then bring those things to market. It's not all about competitive advantage. Sometimes it's about just doing the right thing, and then the rising tide lifts all boats. Like we have the opportunity, I think, to hit this thing head on in a way that we've never had before. It's amazing that we're having this conversation right now. I didn't think that I'd be in the midst of this conversation, but since we are, let's go ahead and have that together. It takes more than solution providers, it takes more than lenders, it takes all of us to look at this in the eye.
You really do have an amazing synergy between leadership in Washington, on the ground, consumers. I really just feel like we're at a very interesting point where some of the things that we've been talking about or haven't been talking about for a while could actually see some action. And I do think that this is one of them. One of the challenges we have when you think about the appraisal process is who who are the appraisers? When you're talking about the human part, of course, there's lots of parts, the digitization, the modernization. When you think about the bulk of appraisals out there right now and the bulk of appraisers, it's a very homogenous group. And that's part of the problem, right? So how do you think we start changing that to attract different people to change that model?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at, the USPAP standards for appraisal, one of the first things as you go into the standards docs is that the goal is to enforce public trust, is to increase public trust in the process, and it's difficult when the Bureau of Labor and Statistics rates the appraisal profession dead last when it comes to diversity. 96% white. That's hard because, again, this is about going into every community, right, and providing options, for people. And when the workforce coming in does not reflect the community, it doesn't enforce that public trust. But also, I mean, diversity is not about charity. It's about eliminating blind spots, and it's about bringing in different perspectives that I think can make the process better. So this isn't for the sake of just looking at a number, a stat, and then trying to change that stat. It's because we want to ensure that we have no blind spots, that we're looking at it from a risk perspective, and looking at it from an opportunity perspective for home buyers and homeowners.
Yeah, and we touched a bit on technology and the appraisal process, right, itself, but technology plays a huge role here in helping to attract a new workforce. I mean, it's a lot sexier to have a cool app than a hunky-dory clipboard, things that will attract you, but also in the space of training and education, which has really been a big barrier, I think, for bringing new folks on board. It's difficult to bring new folks in when you need an appraiser to mentor and spend all the hours. And so now, as we're seeing things evolve and bringing technology into the training mix and allowing us to get to a space where we can have folks ready to hit the ground running in 3 to 6 months, I mean, that's a big leap from where we used to be. And it's a huge part of drawing and attracting those new folks and continuing to educate the community on what a fantastic profession, being an appraiser can be. It's a great career to build. And so we've got to talk about it in those spaces so folks can understand what the opportunity is in front of them.
Well, it's interesting because my next question is about what do you think the future is, the near future, for the human/machine, AI mix for appraisals? And I think that really speaks to the last question, which is, if you're looking at it as a profession, you're a young person, you're like, what is this going to look like in 5 years? Should I spend that 3 to 6 months? So I would really like to get your opinions on what is that mix of, is the human appraiser still going to be in the mix 5 years from now?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is absolutely. And if you think about it, what we're talking about is trying to take pieces of the process that make sense to delegate to technology. We're not talking about replacing the appraiser. You look at the type of housing that exists today, and it continues to change. I mean, I can't tell you how many things I see come across my desk of barn dominiums and the cloud condos. And, we are going to need humans to help us understand the innovation in the housing space. Like, you can't create standards from something you don't even understand yet. And you think about things like renovation lending, which don't work very well today. If we can take our skill set of our appraisers and really focus it on the hard types of lending where we really need to understand the collateral, that's where we really leverage that skill set, and we can transform the way that type of lending works. So I don't see any space where folks don't have a very lucrative future in this space. We just need to leverage people where we need the thinking and the people, and less about the repetitive cookie cutter motions, right?
By the way, I want to live in a barnuminium, whatever you just said. I will sign up in a heartbeat. If you saw my dog, you would be like, yeah, she belongs there.
Yeah, I mean, during COVID, we had, a 70% plus appraisal waiver rate for refis. And yet we still had record months, like 14 months in a row of record appraisal volume and greater than 600,000 appraisals a month. Right now, the average refi appraisal time, turn time is like 18 days. So we've got a ways to go before we talk about, not needing appraisers. I mean, we've got a long road ahead of us. And I think there's this opportunity through technology to provide people with a different approach. I think that desktop appraisals, hybrid appraisals where people are still putting on their analysis cap, and using data that's been collected maybe through some other means in an accurate way. That skill set will always be needed, and even as models get more accurate.
Very interesting. Part of the Freddie Mac data was showing that the number of, I think they say Latinx or Latino, I'm not sure what term they use, but the difference in what the appraisal was and what the selling price of the home was, that gap, right, is what they were measuring. And for Latino borrowers, it was actually the highest. And you just think about the demographics of where we know that the home buyer of the future, the home buyer now, and then is going to be the majority of home buyers are people in that demographic. And so you just think, if we don't get this figured out, we're really not serving the consumer well at all. And this is the consumer that we all are trying to, it's so hard to attract, to find out who wants to buy a home, to get them into the, I mean, if you think about all of the things we're doing to get that consumer and reach that consumer, and then to fall down at this very important part is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of it is that I think the same type of solutions fix both the capacity issue that we're experiencing, but also increase fairness and increase accuracy and consistency across the board. I mean, things like square footage of the home, that is not an art. It's science. It either is this square footage or not, right? You would think. If two people go into the same house, on 2 different days and nothing's changed, nothing should change in the square footage. These are some of the basics we can do as a foundation so that we can deal with the more nuanced, difficult issues. But let's start with what's in front of us with technology that already exists today.
Yeah, I think that folks are hoping for a silver bullet solution, which isn't that the case with all of the tricky problems. And I don't know that there's ever going to be anything perfect, but I think we have to start somewhere. And it feels like starting with consistency, standards, being able to capture things in a way that show us trends and help us understand better what is out there and where maybe the problems are that we need to tackle. At least this gets us going in the very right direction, and so it's time.
Do you see, going forward, one of the things that, we've been talking about appraisers, but, when you think about a hybrid or a third party, whether it's a real estate agent or an inspector or another trained person, where do you see the future of that? It doesn't have to be an appraiser doing that initial gathering of information.
I mean, if you have, again, the technology enables this, right? And at Clear Capital, we've done over 160,000 hybrids, at this point on purchase and refi. Loans enabled by someone using a mobile app going into the home, a real estate agent or broker. And at first we trained over 800 agents and brokers to measure homes in the same way that appraisers do. I wouldn't wish that on any of you. It's a difficult thing, but it pushed us, right, to look at, well, is there technology that solves this? And we discovered that there is. And now, as we look at the results of that, we're seeing those results be more accurate than the traditional appraisal process. So, maybe in the long term, that unlocks even things like homeowners being able to walk through the home and coming up with data that's just as trusted as today's process.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too. I mean, obviously the technology helps us to make sure that we have the standard and it's a little bit easier to train folks and get them up and running. But when you think about, it's a reflection of your brand, this person that's coming into your client's home, right? And so, opening up the ability to have different folks come in and engage with our clients is a huge opportunity to help maybe provide a different experience. And if an appraiser's got a huge workload and maybe feeling the pressure of that, the in and out, you could have a little bit more of a dynamic experience. I think, introducing some other folks into engaging with the client. And so it's just something to think about.
That's a really interesting point that I hadn't thought about, is like that is an opportunity to introduce just diverse viewpoints and just diverse backgrounds, experiences into the process, as long as there's standards that, you know, make it work. We're going to be talking more about appraisals and valuation with a little bit later on today on a panel called The Future of Valuations. And one of the things we're going to be talking about is that request for input that FHFA put out last year. So it'll be really interesting to see that. But in the meantime, if you guys have questions, we have our lovely panelists. We have time for maybe one question if you have it.
I see one over there.
Go ahead, just stand up and shout it out, Romy.
Right? So if you look at even a data set, the data set has so much bias built into it, comps, previous sales information, all that's built in. No technology solution can go and redact the data from the past, right? So that's one sort of quick point. The second point I want to make, which might even be bolder than that one, right, is that, you know, usually in jurisprudence we say innocent before proven guilty, but I would argue that with regard to appraisals, we're guilty before proven innocent. Because if every other part of society has bias, which it obviously does, why wouldn't appraisals? Unless you prove, in fact, that it doesn't, right? So I would reverse the polarity and say, we are guilty on this unless we prove that we're innocent, right? So anyway, 2 comments, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely, when it comes to systemic issues, you know, from past housing policies, that affect the data that are relied on. I mean, again, appraisals are a look back, right, at transactions that have already happened, historical, and those issues aren't going to be solved overnight, certainly not by technology. But that doesn't mean we can't start with an understanding of what could be improved right now from an accuracy standpoint. And that's also why, you know, I think as we were talking about it earlier, it's going to take more than us, more than one lender, to really take a hard look at this. And ultimately, there's going to be policy changes. You know, the White House, you know, launched the interagency task force called PAVE that's looking into this right now. The report's due early next year. And that's why we all have to get into the conversation, bring data, you know, look at the data that we have to understand what the trends are, which will expose, I think, some of those systemic things. But in the meantime, there's technology right now that helps us have more science and less art, so that there isn't inconsistencies between neighborhoods and communities that shouldn't be there.
Yeah, and I think to that point, I mean, your thought process is so spot on, and you have to start in a space where you can at least understand what's going on to help inform those policy decisions. Because I think what happens sometimes is we make decisions a little prematurely and then don't always get closer to where we're trying to go. So I think you're right. I mean, bold action would be amazing. We have to start moving forward. And so your point is definitely heard.
Thank you, guys. We actually are out of time, but we will have a further valuation session, so please bring those questions there. And I just appreciate you guys talking about this and talking about it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
thanks for having us.
Sister.